Over the past 7 seasons of the Known Pleasures podcast, we've made reference to a live music venue in my hometown of Brisbane called Cloudland. In this episode, I wanted to talk a little about its history and its importance to the post-punk era of the late 70s and early 80s Brisbane. Now, to talk about this, I'll need a certain style of music. There we go. The site on top of Bowen Hills in Brisbane was purchased in 1938 by this guy. How's this for a name? Tolemark Harriet Eslick. I'm sure all those letters are in the wrong order. He wanted to build Brisbane's Luna Park, as he had built Luna Park in Melbourne and one had just opened in Sydney. I guess he thought people of Brisbane would also like to sit in spinning cups. They'd also built on this site a grand ballroom. It was the largest of its kind in Brisbane and the largest dance floor in Australia, which could accommodate 1,000 dancing couples. Now, I wouldn't have thought they would have found 1,000 couples in Brisbane at the time, but if you did, and they wanted to dance, this was the place. However, there was something brewing overseas at the time, which kind of threw a spanner in the craftworks. So Cloudland's completion was delayed until after the commencement of World War II. I guess they couldn't compete with the World War II opening ceremony, so they delayed the festivities. Flagging attendance was only exacerbated by the wartime atmosphere, which is kind of understandable. I mean, no one wants to dance at this time. I mean, this is life during wartime. That's right. No, it's not. So Cloudland and Luna Park pretty much closed down within 6 months of opening, and the owner, Mr. Eslick, mysteriously disappeared. And it remained uninhabited until 1942, when the US military took over and they renamed it Camp Luna Park, which was named as such as the US servicemen all slept in bunks on the dance floor. So I guess if there was ever an attack, they'd have to evacuate the dance floor. I had another murder on the dance floor joke, but I'm not going to do that. I found an article online that mentions R.A. McGuinness, who was the chairman of the Defence Central Camouflage Committee, saying that he had no trouble camouflaging many of the buildings being used by the US Army, but Cloudland, which was perched on top of a hill like a castle, was a bit of a problem. He said, and I quote, "One major concern is the Luna Park Dance Hall on the crest of Bowen Hills, overlooking the industrial locality of Newstead. It's close to petrol tanks, gasworks, and many other important establishments, and can be seen from all over Brisbane. Being on the crest of a hill, toning down would not fully achieve the object. So we consider that its removal would be to the benefit of the war effort and all of Brisbane City." So they were thinking about demolishing it way back then. Anyway, thankfully they didn't, and the dance continued. After the war, in an effort to maintain post-war relations and instill goodwill, the US military restored the iconic tongue-and-groove spring-mounted flooring, repainted the interior, and returned all pre-war furnishings to their rightful places. I just want to talk about the dance floor here. Now, there was a rumour going back to when I was a teen that the entire dance floor was set on these huge springs that gave it that buoyant feeling. It turns out this wasn't true. There was just something in the way they installed these tongue-and-groove floorboards that made it feel springy. In 1947, Cloudland was purchased for £16,000 by two sisters and opened on the 24th of April, and they turned it into a thriving enterprise. Now, I know what you're thinking. Did they have balls? Yes, they did. In 1947, they had the Engineers Ball, the Masonic Ball. Then there was the Pharmacy Ball. I imagine you needed some kind of prescription to get into that one. The Combined Grammar Schools Ball, the Cinderella Ball, the Grand Scottish Debutante Ball, the Royal Society of St. George Ball. That's a lot of balls. But, this was a ballroom. So I guess they didn't see beyond the ballroom dancing or the early rock and roll years to see the kind of new wave future on the horizon. They didn't know it yet, but they had built this room for the likes of Joe Strummer, Ian McCulloch, and Suggs. During the 50s and 60s, Cloudland became a great venue for touring international acts as well as a lot of the local rock and roll acts. So in February 1958, Buddy Holly played 3 nights there. Surely that fact alone should have bestowed a huge heritage listing on this building. I mean, I'm not much of a Buddy Holly fan, but he achieved this mythical status. I mean, the day he died is referred to as the day the music died. So he played 3 nights here while the music was still very much alive, And then a year later, the music dies, along with the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and a Beechcraft Bonanza light airplane. And during the early 60s, there was a Saturday talent show that featured a very young Bee Gees. I think they probably played You Should Be Ballroom Dancing, something like that. There were many other people who played there, like Jerry Lee Lewis, Paul Anka, Johnny O'Keefe, Little Patty from the 60s. And when it went into the 70s, people like Skyhooks, who else? Little River Band, AC/DC played there. And this brings us to the Known Pleasures era. My first experience seeing a band at Cloudland was Dr. Feelgood on the 21st of July 1979. Now, a guy called Paul O'Brien took some wonderful shots of some of these gigs. A week later, I saw XTC supported by Flowers and the Numbers. I loved this show, but it became apparent on this night that not only was I seeing music that was alternative to mainstream, but I was also seeing these bands in an alternative venue. And that's what Cloudland represented. It was a different place to go for like-minded individuals. In the mainstream rock arena, people like Chicago, Rod Stewart, Linda Ronstadt were touring at the same time. But they all went to Brisbane's Festival Hall because that was the only venue in town. But now, in this new era of music, I got to see Rockpile, Ian Dury and the Blockheads, The Vapors, The Stray Cats, Echo and the Bunnymen, Simple Minds, The Teardrop Explodes, Split Enz, INXS, The Clash, and most amazing of all was Madness. Can you imagine what it's like dancing to Madness on a springy dance floor? It was like dancing on a trampoline. Okay, I have to play some sad music here. The last show I saw at Cloudland was Simple Minds on the 9th of October 1982. Less than a month later, on the 7th of November, the building was demolished at midnight to make way for an apartment complex, without a permit and in spite of its National Trust listing. John Wilsteed, the former bass player from the Go-Betweens, said, "They took away something dramatic and replaced it with something mundane." I'll always remember the great times I had at Cloudland, but I'm kind of angry that later generations of Brisbane kids didn't get to enjoy this place. Like Ericsson Liverpool or CBGB's in New York, I guess these places only exist for just one moment in time.